I will admit it's a little bit intimidating to have to talk about so many books. Grab a cup of coffee or tea, get some snacks. This is gonna be a long one, but we're going to have the best time. Somehow, just somehow, I really don't know how this happened, but I managed to read 18 books in the month of October. And I also completed all of the books that I wanted to read and then went far above and beyond that. I just had such an incredible reading month in terms of the quality of the books that I was reading. I had an average rating of 4.26 stars, and I think this is one of the best reading months that I've had all year. And I don't know what witch I have to thank for jinxing me to have the best month ever. There is such an interesting collection of genres here. We have fantasy, classics, manga, middle grade. I cannot wait to start talking to you guys about these books, but before we can, I just want to take a second to thank the sponsor of today's video, which is none other than one of my biggest supporters, Book of the Month. If you haven't heard of Book of the Month before, they are a fast-growing and super popular online book service for readers like you and me. They help us find books that we are bound to love, and they also introduce us to new and emerging authors. Book of the Month has the best price for hardcover fiction. You can get your first book for only $9.99 using the code CHILL. One of the many things that I absolutely adore of Book of the Month is that they are completely risk-free. You can skip any month at any time and you will not be charged. They have officially started shipping to Canada, so to my Canadian viewers, you can finally get your hands on this beautiful blue box filled with amazing books and amazing reading material. For the month of November, I got White Horse, which is a horror debut, and Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. They also have a podcast that's called The Virtual Book Tour, where they interview the authors of the books that they feature. Make sure you head on over to bookofthemonth.com to get your first book for only $9.99 using the code CHILL. Once again, thank you to Book of the Month for sponsoring this video, and without further ado, let's get into all of the books that I read in the month of October. Let's just have a quick little overview. There we go. Yes, these are all of them. I started off my month extremely strong by reading one of my favorite books of 2022. I think this is either top 1 or top 2. I'm still not sure, but it's definitely up there. And it is Babel, or Babel, however you feel like saying it. Babel, or The Necessity of Violence, an arcane history of the Oxford Translators' Revolution, written by the one, the only R.F. Kuang. I was so lucky to get an ARC, an advanced reader's edition of this book, and this is how it looks. I think this is one of the books that has the most tabs, and honestly, I regret nothing. I just know this book is one for the ages. I feel like this is a classic in the making. This is a book that deals with student revolutions and studies colonial resistance, and it also talks about how language and translation are used as tools of war. I think this is the 1828. It is so hard to explain why this is one of the best novels that I will probably ever read in my life, but I mean, I can try. This book tackles the darkest parts of academia, and it also tries to explain how universities, especially from the West, are built upon the destruction of other cultures. It tackles colonization, but from the point of view of the colonized and the mindset that we're sort of forced into, and we're also trying to deconstruct everything that we've been taught to believe. And it's just a very interesting take, and I just found it fascinating. Every single page was just such a joy to read, and at times it was so hard to get through, but there are some lines that are so hard-hitting, and they're just like, they blew my mind. They put into words things that I didn't even know I was feeling or that I've gone through, and that was just such a wild moment for me. He had become so good at holding two truths in his head at once: that he was an Englishman and not, that the Chinese were a stupid, backwards people, and that he was also one of them. He had danced for years on the razor's edge of these truths, had remained there as a means of survival, a way to cope, unable to accept either side fully, because an unflinching examination of the truth was so frightening that the contradictions threatened to break him. Like, are you kidding? Apart from the academic side, we also deal with the human side of it, and these characters are one of the most beautifully complex characters I've ever read from, and falling in love with them, experiencing life as they did, and being a part of this group, and also just everything that we had to go through, everything that we survived, the things that brought us closer together, the things that made us fall apart. I could go on and on about my love for Babel, but I think that I could never do it justice, just how much I love this book and how important it is for every single person to read it. I think everyone can take something away from reading Babel, and I think that you should. This is the strongest start that I could ever ask for in a reading month. This was the easiest 5-star I've ever given, and yeah, it just sucks. It just sucks that after Babel, I had to read probably the worst book that I read in October, and also the most disappointing, which was Long Live the Pumpkin Queen, written by Shay Earnshaw. This was in my 5-star predictions video, and as you can see by the pain in my face, I was so horribly wrong that I am now scared of ever again having expectations, because if there is even a possibility that this could happen again, I don't want it. I gave this 2.5 stars. In this book, we're following Sally Skellington. She's recently become the Pumpkin Queen after marrying Jack Skellington. These are characters from Nightmare Before Christmas. In this book, we get cameos from some of the characters that we met and loved in the movie, and somehow Shay Earnshaw made me hate them. I mean, maybe hate is a strong word, but she just made me, she somehow turned one of my favorite Halloween movies into the most boring story I've ever heard, or ever read, or ever had the displeasure of getting to know. And she also turned one of my favorite characters, Sally, into just such a whiny and such a lackluster, lack of personality type of character. She is so bland. She is so full of nothing. No pun intended. I was hoping for Sally to have some spunk. I was hoping for her to be a little bit tenacious, but she's just really whiny and she's very boring, and that made for a really hard reading experience, because even though it's so short, and even though the letters, like the size of the letter is like size 14, it just felt like such a long book, and it just felt like a waste of time. I think it's a mixture of the writing style and also the pacing, and also just, you know, I just think it was like a mixture of everything. I personally didn't find it enjoyable. I didn't think anything about this was fun. Sadly, I wouldn't recommend this to anyone. I was just bored the whole way through, and it didn't give me any good emotions. I just felt like this was a waste of my time. So I'm going to stop trashing on this book, because maybe some of you actually liked it, but I sadly wasn't one of them, so I'm just going to move on. After the nightmare that Long Live the Pumpkin Queen was, I needed a pick-me-up. So of course I picked up the latest Junji Ito novel, and that is The Liminal Zone. Look at this beauty. She is gorgeous. Look at the back. It's a little bit terrifying. This was fantastic. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. It was creepy, it was horrifying, it was exactly what I needed. And I read this like at 11 p.m. at night, which is perfect. Like, if you ever want to read a Junji Ito novel, don't read it in the middle of the day. Please, that's just going to ruin the whole experience for you. I just really love Junji Ito's drawing style, and I love how dark his imagination is. I love the places that his mind goes to. I'm so happy that my mind does not go there, but I can still really appreciate these stories, and some of them were truly horrifying. I have a great time reading Junji Ito, and this was no exception. So fantastic, would definitely recommend. Then I listened to the audiobook of Mexican Gothic, written by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Everybody has told me that this book is really bad and it's really boring, so that's what I was expecting. And maybe because my expectations were so low, I was able to appreciate it and have fun with this book. I gave Mexican Gothic 3.5 stars, and it was really reminiscent of Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and it also gave me Haunting of Hill House. And just connecting those two books into Mexican Gothic made the experience so much more satisfying and so much more creepy. Like, this house has a mind of its own. I don't know why, but I really love when authors give this sinister personality to a house, and the way that the things are described, it just felt like this monster. It felt like this sentient being, and it made for a really creepy and a very horrific vibe that I was totally in the mood for. In Mexican Gothic, we're following Noemi, who recently received a very distressing letter from her cousin who is currently living at an estate, and Noemi decides to visit her just to make sure that she's doing okay. But when she gets there, she starts to notice things aren't quite what she thought they would be. Noemi doesn't want to leave until she makes sure that her cousin is safe, but she's soon going to find out that she can't leave either. So it turns into this really sinister, creepy, horrific type of story. I really enjoy Silvia Moreno Garcia's writing because it is so creepy and the descriptions are so appalling and they're so vivid. You almost feel like it's right in front of you, and it makes for, like, sometimes I was so uncomfortable reading a few scenes because they were so explicit and they made me extremely uncomfortable. And yeah, it was a very interesting reading experience, and I highly enjoyed this book, especially because, you know, October, spooky season, I was in need of these types of stories, and haunted houses, haunted men, violence, things that go bump in the night. It was just exactly what I was looking for at the moment, so I really enjoyed it. Then I read the cutest graphic novel that I've read in a very long time, and it was Fangs, written by Sarah Anderson. This was a 5-star. I read it in one sitting. It's super short, so you can too. And it was just the cutest. It's like this love story between a werewolf and a vampire, and it's just different situations between them. The humor is right up my alley. They are so in love with each other, and their differences just make for really funny instances and moments between them. The whole way through, I was reading it with a smile, and it brightened up my day. So if you're looking for a pick-me-up, a cute, fun pick-me-up with some dark humor sprinkled over all of it, I would highly recommend Fangs by Sarah Anderson. Then I read another graphic novel that was actually recommended by one of you guys, and it was called Crema, and I think it's written by Johnny Christmas. I ended up giving Crema 3 stars because the story was interesting. We are following these characters who work on a coffee shop, and our main character, when she drinks a little bit too much coffee, she starts to see ghosts, and she can actually talk to them, and it's this whole thing. And I think the premise is really interesting, but I think the execution of it all was a little bit rushed. I didn't find myself getting attached to the characters. I didn't find myself really, like, you know, empathizing with them. I didn't really smile or feel all giddy inside, as you should when you're reading a love story and when you're reading a book or a story about coffee. Like, coffee and love, what is there not to love? Apparently the execution. So yeah, it was enjoyable, but I think I was just expecting to feel a little bit more or just feel attached to the characters, and I didn't. Another pretty disappointing book, I swear, I don't know why, but I started the month really strong, and then I started to read just not great books. But anyways, then I picked up another recommendation by you guys, and it was The Graveyard Book, written by Neil Gaiman. And I have read one other book by Neil Gaiman before, and it is Coraline. I'm a big fan of the movie Coraline, so I was thinking that I was going to love the book just as much. But I think I don't really vibe with Neil Gaiman's writing, and that was definitely cemented when I read The Graveyard Book, because you would think that such an interesting premise would make for a really wonderful book. But I found myself really bored, and I think the pacing was really slow as well. So the whole time that I was reading The Graveyard Book, I was just like, when is this going to end? I need this to end. In The Graveyard Book, we're following this kid, or this baby, who has grown up in a graveyard because his whole family was murdered and he was the sole survivor. We don't know why they were murdered. It's all this huge mystery. And this little kid, he's called Nobody, and he grows up in the graveyard. He's brought up by these ghosts, so he learns a few tips and tricks here and there. He can move through things. He doesn't really have any alive friends, but he has a pretty good life and he has lessons, he has people taking care of him, but there's always this mystery of who killed his family and why, and is he still in danger? So yeah, you know, the way that I describe it, it sounds pretty interesting and it sounds pretty fun, but I didn't have fun and it wasn't interesting. And I think it just has to do with the writing and just me not connecting with it. So that's why I gave The Graveyard Book 2.5 stars. Don't kill me. I know this book is loved by so many people, but sadly, I am not one of them. And yeah, after such a disappointing read, I needed a pick-me-up. So I went ahead and read Fragments of Horror, written by Junji Ito. Holy crap and a cracker. This is one of the best collection of short stories that I've read from Junji Ito. It was fantastic. It was horrifying. I think this is Junji Ito at his best. You know, I think this definitely goes up on my favorites list from Junji Ito. Up there we also have Deserter, Uzumaki, and Smashed. Those are just some incredible collection of short stories, and Fragments of Horror definitely goes up there as well. Just like, look at that. Look at that baby. Just when you think Junji Ito's imagination can't get more twisted, he goes and does this. And this was just incredible. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I read it in one sitting. It was horrifying and I loved it. This is where my ratings start to go up. I think I left some of the worst books for the beginning of the month, but now we're getting into the good stuff, because after Fragments of Horror, I read Beautiful World, Where Are You, written by Miss Sally Rooney. And after I read Conversations with Friends last month, I just thought Sally Rooney was a one-hit wonder, because Normal People is one of my favorite books of the year. So I just thought, hey, maybe I just like the one book by this author and I didn't really have any expectations for this book. I was just like, okay, let's just read it and see what happens. I loved this book. It was so good. I love the cast of characters that we have. They are so beautifully complex and I loved getting to know them. I loved getting to know the intricacies of their stories and the way that they relate to people. Why are they the way that they are? Why do they express themselves like this? And there were some moments where I saw myself so clearly described on the page that I was like, Miss Sally Rooney, can you stop being on my case? Like, it was just a really wonderful reading experience and I loved it. I really enjoyed so much. I think the only reason that I didn't give this book 5 stars is because sometimes I feel like they talked a lot about politics, and I'm not against books talking about politics, but maybe like tone it down just a tiny bit. I was a little bit more interested in the relationships that these characters had, and not so much so on all of the political takes that Sally Rooney was talking about, but it's okay. I still really enjoyed this book and I think this is a lot better than Conversations with Friends, so that's a relief. Definitely a relief. Alice, Felix, Aileen, and Simon are still young, but life is catching up with them. They desire each other, they delude each other, they get together, they break apart. Are they standing in the last lighted room before the darkness, bearing witness to something? Will they find a way to believe in a beautiful world? I don't know, like, I just really enjoy books that are character-based. I think that the stronger connection I have with the characters, the more that I enjoy a book. So I think this book was just perfect for me. If there's no plot, I actually don't have a problem with that. I know that a lot of people like need plot for them to enjoy a book, but I'm not one of them. So this book was great for me. This next book was also recommended by one of you guys, and it is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. After a lifetime of bounties and bloodshed, Viv is hanging up her sword for the last time. The battle-weary orc aims to start fresh, opening the first ever coffee shop in the city of Thune. Just imagine this huge, hulking ogre. She's been known to kill foes left and right. Her sword is always bloody. People are terrified of her. And suddenly she's like, you know what? I'm tired of this life. I want a slow, easy life where I just make coffee, where I make people happy and people can just come into my store and just relax and do the things that they need to do with the smell of coffee everywhere. And you'd think it'd be boring or like slow paced because it's this retired ogre that's opening up a coffee shop. But the past doesn't always stay in the past. So Yeah, there's definitely stuff going on, and we have like the cast of characters is so darling, and the love story as well, because of course there's romance. I just think this was such a wonderful and cozy comfort read. I think this book is perfect for fall as well. If you're not really into the spooky thriller side of fall, this is such a beauty to read, and it made me feel so warm and fuzzy inside, especially if you're reading this book with coffee. It's perfect. It's just, it was so good, and I loved every single second of it. I would highly recommend Legends and Lattes. It was just wonderful. It was everything. I loved every single second of it. A big-hearted story about the small things in life, and a lovingly written ode to the genre. Take a break from epic battles and saving the world. This is my new comfort read. Then I read Rebecca, written by Daphne du Maurier. This was actually my second time reading this. The first time that I read this, I gave it 2 stars. But I think some extenuating circumstances made me hate this book. And I just knew that if I gave it a second chance, and like a proper second chance, I knew that I was going to really like it. So I decided to give it a second chance, and here we are with a 4-star rating, loving every single second of this, especially because I read it with a friend, and that made the experience a lot better because we got to discuss everything that was creeping us out. I just think it's always better when you can discuss books with friends and people that you love, because it just makes the reading experience that much more special. And sometimes your friends can point out things that you didn't even notice, so it's a very enriching experience as well. In Rebecca, we're following this unnamed main character. She marries this rich man, Maxime, and he has this huge estate which is called Manderley. He recently lost his wife, Rebecca, and our main character, who still remains unnamed, we never know what her name is, which I just think, again, is genius. I think she is a genius writer, and I think that all of the little decisions that she makes throughout this book are just so wonderful, and the way that they all tie in together at the end is just majestic. But anyways, our main character marries Maxime, and they move into Manderley, and things are just off. The main character starts to realize that she's sort of living under the shadow of his dead wife, and it's really hard to fight with dead people because you'll never beat them, obviously. Like, they're on this pedestal, and it's so hard to beat someone that's not even there. Like, ghosts, that's hard but not impossible. Dead people, it's a little bit different. So I mean, ghosts are dead people. Sorry, I'm getting off the rails. I found Rebecca to be such a beautifully crafted gothic novel, and it was perfectly eerie and also creepy at times. Like, it has this supernatural tone, but at the same time it doesn't, and you don't really know what's going on, and that just adds to the creepy factor. And I just really loved Rebecca, and I'm so happy that I gave it a second chance, because then I wouldn't have been able to fully appreciate the magic of Rebecca. So yeah, this is definitely going into best classics I've read. I do want to read more of Rebecca du Maurier, just because I really love the way that she writes, and the way that she describes things is also really powerful and beautiful. Oh, we're kind of matching. I love that for us. Then I read another classic, and this is by far one of my all-time favorite classics. I think either #1 or #2. And that is Frankenstein, written by the Mary Shelley. I could go on and on about my love for Frankenstein, and I always thought that I didn't like classics until I read Frankenstein, and that is why I've read this book over 3 times now. I think this was either my 3rd or 4th time, and every time that I read it, it gets better and better, because you start to notice things that you didn't notice on your first few reads, and you start to really fully understand these characters, especially the creature, and how hard it must have been for him. I had never properly annotated Frankenstein, so this time around I did exactly that, and I went ham on the annotations. Like, I did so much underlining, I did so much analyzing, and I had so much fun. I did cry, of course, because who wouldn't feel for a creature that's been abandoned and that's just looking for someone to love him? But when he comes across people, all they do is hate on him. He just wants to be loved, and he wants to feel for the first and maybe only ever time in his life the warmth of another person loving him back. And the fact that he never does is one of the most heartbreaking pieces of history, of literature, of anything you want to call it. I think that this story is so important, and I love that this is such an accessible classic. I think that if you're looking to get into classics or read your very first classic, Frankenstein is definitely the one for you. There is so much to learn, and it's so easy to get into the story. I wouldn't say it's slow-paced at all, and I think that the way that Mary Shelley explores the human condition and human emotions is just so beautiful and so heartbreaking. It's perfect. The next 6 books that I read were actually for a reading challenge that you may or may not have already seen the video of. For a whole week, I swapped my screen time for some reading time. I don't want to think. I don't want to read. I just want to close my eyes and disassociate. And I managed to read quite a few books. Yes, I did. These are all the books that I read for that challenge. I read volumes 16 and 17 of Jujutsu Kaisen. Both of these were 5 stars. We're finally out of the Shibuya arc, which I'm very grateful for. That was traumatizing enough. But apparently this new arc is even worse. So I'm not looking forward to that, but I'm still gonna read them. Then I read volumes 4 and 5. This is 4, this is 5. Okay. Then I read volumes 4 and 5 of Spy Family. Again, both of these were 5 stars. This story just keeps getting better and better. We're getting introduced to new characters. We're spending time with characters that we love and adore. Like, I just laugh so much reading these novels, or like these volumes. I always just have such a wonderful time reading Spy Family, and I will forever be grateful to that one person who sent me volume 1, being like, okay, you didn't listen to me when I recommended it to you on your comments, so I'm sending you volume 1. Please read Spy Family. Like, I owe you so much of my happiness. My camera ran out of battery, but as I was saying, apart from the 4 manga that I read for this reading challenge, I also read an 800-page book. I was very surprised that I actually finished this. And it is House of Sky and Breath, written by Sarah J. Maas. This is the 2nd book in the Crescent City trilogy series. I'm still not sure how many books this series is going to have, but yeah, I read this I think in like the span of 3 days, and nobody is as surprised as I am. But this book single-handedly made me believe in the fantasy genre again, and now I'm looking for fantasy recommendations left and right. So if you guys have any fantasy books that you think I would love, please leave them down below. I would really appreciate it, because I'm finally re-entering my fantasy phase, or my fantasy era. I need your help to keep the momentum going. So this was a fantastic sequel in my opinion. I know that some people found it boring and very slow paced, but I think that for someone that hasn't read fantasy in so long, this was really good, and I loved all of the reveals. I loved most of the characters. There are just like 1 or 2 characters that I found extremely unbearable and irritating, but apart from those 2, I just loved everything about this book, especially Rune. I love him. He has a very special place in my heart. Yeah, he's joining the ranks up there with like Riss and Kaz and who else? Neil. Yeah, they're all up there. So welcome Rune to the family. I'm so happy I get to collect you. I just love how Sarah J. Maas is spinning this story. I love the little revelations that she gives us along the way. I love the little twists and turns that she's coming up with. I just think they're really fun to read about, and I just had a blast reading this book. I can't wait for the 3rd book, which apparently is coming out in 4 months, so hopefully I'm still alive by then. Fingers crossed. Never thought I'd say that. The last book that I read in the month of October was actually a classic, and this one is written by Jane Austen, and it is Emma. This was an interesting experience just because I had very high expectations going into it, but when I started reading it, they kept on getting lower and lower and lower. And then I ended up really enjoying this book. Like by the halfway point, I found myself rooting for these characters and just having fun experiencing life with them. And I will say the pacing is a little bit slow. Like basically there's nothing going on apart from Emma, our titular character, trying to matchmake all of these people. Yeah, she does ruin a life or 2, but it's okay. It's part of her character development, And if a few people need to lose happiness and lose their fortunes along the way, that's okay, because Emma is growing and she's learning. And I just really enjoyed this. Of course, this has one of the most famous and most beloved love confessions in the Austen universe. And when I read it, I will say my heart, you know, it beat a bit faster than usual and my eyes got all watery for some reason. It was just a wonderful moment. I get it. I really do get it now. I'm an understand girly. These are all the books. These are all of the books that I read in the month of October. As you can see, I had a very successful reading month, and I hope that you did as well. If you read one book or if you read half of a book, it still counts and you shouldn't feel bad. Please don't compare yourself to other people. You know, reading is reading. As long as we're reading good books and as long as we're keeping the habit alive, that's what matters. So let me know in the comments below how your reading month went. Let me know if you read any good books or if you read any horrible books. I cannot wait to read about it in the comments. If you're still here, leave this emoji to let me know that you're a true simper and that you're supporting me and my channel. Remember to like and subscribe and comment and just do all the good stuff that keeps this channel alive. Thank you so much for watching. I love every single one of you, and I will see you next time. Bye.
Hey Jimmy, you nice. Keep going.